Hi, I'm Richard Luna, CEO of Protected Harbor. Welcome to the top mistakes that organizations make in data centers. And I thought we'd take a different approach than most places. The takeaways that I'd like for you to get out of this are what causes crashes in data centers and applications, what are the underlying reasons, and why we're unique to repair or resolve those issues. A little bit about us. We manage a little over 800 medical billing and connected virtual servers, and we manage about 1.5 petabytes of data across 4 different large DCs. We manage the technology for over 200 companies. What's unique about us is we deploy and build our own document management system. And so what that means is under one house we have programmers, network, L2, L3 people, engineers, frontline staff, all under the same umbrella. So there's a Dell IT survey that was recently released, and it had some real interesting data. And I'm bringing this up because it applies to why is the medical field unique in how the level of crashes and what occurs. Well, it's unique because since 2016, the amount of data has increased by 878%. 40% of the responders said that they had unplanned downtime. And that was the most significant issue that led to data corruption. 30% of the responders said they encountered data loss. And we'll go over why those losses occurred. Only 17% said they were ready for growth in an outage. What happens when there's loss is you get reputational damage. So reputational damage occurs from unplanned outages, slow applications, or data loss. Right? Customers get frustrated, and you really get a reputation of, well, it's not stable. The 5 areas that cause reputational damage, and these are in the sequence of most important to least important, is storage, technology design, informational silos, insufficient redundancies, and a lack of deep monitoring. For storage gets overloaded or it's poorly designed. So we've seen, for example, storage on RAID zeros, and I'll get a little technical. You ask if you want to go deep later, please feel free. I'm a technician by nature and by training, so I love to talk deep if you'd like to. But we've seen RAID 5, for example. RAID 5 is good. It'll protect a storage unit from a single disk failure. However, it does absolutely nothing for response time. So we've seen 10, 15, 20 heavy VMs all banging away on an overloaded storage unit. And everybody's complaining that the application is slow, but nobody bothered to look at the storage unit. Storage is the single biggest impact on performance, especially for most medical applications, because what do medical applications have? Databases. So if the database is relatively in good shape, the storage is the single biggest impact to that performance. Storage also, you look at redundancy. What we've seen is a lack of understanding the importance of keeping that storage unit up. And there's a trade-off, right? The more copies of keeping it up, the more redundancy you layer in, then the slower the response time, because you've got to make sure that if you're issuing a commit, for example, across a storage unit that gets replicated to the other units before you say to the application, okay, you're good. So there's a trade-off. Second issue is technology design. So programmers and application types do not have a sensitivity to how many servers they're using. So what we typically have seen when we onboard a situation is, okay, we've got 10 servers, we've got 15 servers, and we look and they're running 150 different roles. Those roles need to be spread out. We have constantly seen too few servers doing too many tasks. And what happens then is if a server is doing 10 tasks and one of those tasks fails, now the server itself fails. So now the other 9 tasks that it was doing also now come down because that one task caused everything else, so you get a cascade failure. Convoluted networking caused by maintaining antiquated connections, growth, and expansion, or need for compatibility. So a lot of medical data is file-based in its transfer and in the way it communicates. So those files require convoluted networking to go from one server to another server. So maybe there's better approaches. What we do is we work to resolve those approaches, but typically what an organization, because their IT is overwhelmed, is don't worry about it, we'll get to it later. And so we've seen these FTP servers that are wide open or are using unencrypted protocols because there's 10,000 connections going to it, and that's going to take 6 months to get those resolved. That kind of thought leads to attacks that ransomware could go in and devastate organizations, which we've seen. I mean, it's not. This is the ugly stuff. The need for compatibility, the overloading of the IT department, also means security takes a backseat. So that becomes an issue, a la ransomware. What's unique about medical applications is the HL7 files. There's just a ton of them. They're tiny. But you can have a 4-bit, here's a side note, I'm going to get geeky. HL7 could be a really small file, 4K. However, when you lay it out on the disk, it will go to the entire sector of the disk, which could be a terabyte. So now you've got this little 4K file, but it's chewing up a huge amount of disk. Why? Because the designer of the storage designed it for one way, and the file that they're actually storing is coming from a different place. So that's where you've got a technology incompatibility, and it comes back to technology design. Informational silos. So I'm old. I've been in this industry 35 plus years, and I'm a programmer by nature. When we came into this world, you had to have a broad understanding of the technology and what the impacts were. What's happened subsequently is we've now got DBAs who are really good at understanding SQL and understanding how the queries work, but they have absolutely no idea how files are stored. And then you have administrators who understand files, and they really are good at understanding how the files work, but they have absolutely no idea about the networking layer and what's going on within the L2 and L3 layer. And the networking engineers who understand L2 and L3 and understand how the bits are going from one system to another have absolutely no idea what's going on in the firewall, what's open, what's closed, what's available, what could pass on the network. And the firewall administrators have absolutely no idea what the actual application is doing. So the application programmers have absolutely no idea what's going on in the server, and the server people have no idea what's going on in the database. So each one of these areas evolves over time and adds technology, but what happens is nobody's looking at the big picture, right? Because you say, hey, the program is slow. What, must be a coding problem? And the programmers say, oh, no, that's the DBAs. Our code is not. There's nothing wrong with our code. It's the database people. And the database people say, I don't know, the database looks good to us. We're running queries and they're coming back. So it must be the networking people. And the networking people say, they look at the network and they say, oh no, they run a ping test. Oh, the network is running fine. So it must be the firewall people. They're the ones who are holding this up because they're inspecting the traffic. And the firewall people say, I don't know what you guys are talking about. This is definitely an application problem. And now we're back to the beginning. So, and it's the nature of people, right? We all don't want to deal with things, but a cooperative approach is the only way that actually works. Because these problems are getting larger and larger and larger because the number of systems that integrate and interconnect are becoming larger and larger and larger, right? 878% increase in traffic since 2016. 4, insufficient redundancies. We worked, and what's really critical is to have redundancies at every single layer. And all of this is possible, but again, it takes understanding what's the goal and what's the mission. SQL, it's really easy, HA, or relatively easy. HA, high availability. Run 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 12. I mean, we've got one client, we've got 56 SQL servers, all running in a redundant environment. And then you have to work with the database administrators because you got to figure out, okay, I've got 100 tables. Are some of these tables could take an outage? Others, they've got to run nonstop. And then others are huge, but you've got to balance out the storage. Where do they go? So that's what doesn't occur. File storage, same thing. You can run multiple, run file servers or run file storage in a pool. This way, if you lose a server because who knows what, there's a hardware failure, everything stays up. What causes data loss is when one of these components fails and then the application kind of runs on its own. And the application could be anything. It could be a custom app, could be your ERP, could be your CRM. The code is going to run whatever the programmer anticipated. So if the underlying infrastructure gets wonky and something disappears, then that code's going to go off into Never Never Land. And that will cause either data loss or an outage. Storage is really, like I said, the number one. You always want to have redundancy at every single level. And then networking is the connection to that storage. So, for example, every time we do something, we run multiple wires, physically, multiple wires, and then multiple VLANs to each storage unit. So that if a tech trips and yanks a cable out, storage still stays up. And I know that sounds like really stupid. In 2021, you have to worry about people tripping. That's the real world. So you don't say this will never occur. You plan and say, okay, when this breaks, what's going to occur? When this piece breaks, what's going to occur? When this piece breaks, what's going to occur? And you plan for it. Lack of deep monitoring. So most monitoring packages out the door will monitor for, is the server up and down? Is the application up and down? Great. But what about the next tier of monitoring? That's where you get deep monitoring, where you go into the disk queue length. So now you can quantify how is the storage performing. You can quantify how is the server performing. You can quantify how is the application performing. That's critical because over time, as you see poor performance, you can then begin to triangulate on where the application or applications are failing. So if you look at a world where you don't have 10 servers, you have 100 servers because you've spread out the load, and now you've got detailed monitoring enabled on it, you start to become knowledgeable over time what causes the spikes in traffic and what doesn't. And this applies to whether you're on Azure, on-prem, Amazon. I mean, Azure and Microsoft with Azure and Amazon, what they'll do is that you'll see a spike in the billing, right? Because you pay for inter-server communication. So if you're chatty or you're causing a CPU spike, you'll just drive the price up. Well, how about if you redesigned it so that you didn't? Then you live within the pool threshold. Lack of application. Everything I said was hardware based, but then there's a whole other level when it comes to the application. So you can work with the application and say, okay, when this directory, for example, gets beyond 200 entries, we need an alert because that means that the application is about to crash, right? But you need time to understand. You have to work in a collaborative environment. You be smart and understand where the failure points are. Why are we different? So we start with a TIP, which is a technology improvement plan. This is our approach. It's unique to each client, but the approach we take is universal. We start with the storage. This is our belief. Storage is key when it comes to databases, especially for medical. And we look at load time, response time, where failures. So if the main storage goes, where's that traffic going to wind up? We look at technology design. So we look at network segmentation and isolation because we don't want a broad network because that's going to mean that an attack could scoop over from one network to another and then we will have no idea. We want that network traffic broken out as much as we possibly can. We work to overcome information silos. As I said, we've got people in every sphere of influence. Information silo is a people problem. We created it because of the way we educate and the way we look at the world. That only people can solve it. Technology can't solve the information silo issue. So what we do is, internally we work collaboratively. Me and some meetings are big, we've got a lot of people, but the benefit is everybody knows which direction we're heading in and what is going on. So that approach is what works to accomplish these problems. Insufficient redundancies, HA, high availability, really key to keeping things up. Redundant networking, redundant infrastructure, that means the cost is an issue and budgets are a real world issue, but then reputational damage is really expensive. And so the argument we always make is, okay, what are you going to tell your customers if you're down and it takes a day to come back up? It'd be better to spend the money, right? Lack of deep monitoring. So we have AOA, that's our term, it's application outage avoidance. And once we've got a client starting down a TIP, a technology improvement plan, we can start to understand the application, understand how they're using the storage, make adjustments, and then we can write an AOA for it, which is a script. So, for example, we know that there's going to be 100,000 HL7 files that will be imported at 2 o'clock in the morning and they're going to cause a spike. Well, plan for it. And if the spike is 30%, plan 60%. Plan 80%, and then adjust for it. So now you've got a feedback, an issue, and a feedback resulting in a closed loop. One of the things we do is we bring everything together, meaning we get a Russian IP attacking a server. Let's say it's an RDP server. We grab that IP. The Windows is going to tell you what the IP is. But what Windows doesn't do is it sticks it in the event log. Who's watching the event log? Well, we happen to be. So we grab that IP and we bring it all the way to the firewall and we put it as a block IP. Now, that IP can't attack any other servers that are on there on any service. That's AOA. It's a closed loop between the front end and the back end. And bit by bit, over time, this single thing causes high uptime to go through the roof, because now everything is a planned event, not an oh my gosh, we're down.